welcome to the whiteboard. We're going to chat about metabolic flexibility. This is the first whiteboard talk that I've done, so if you guys like these or you want to see more of them on specific topics, just let me know. Happy to do them. I am an educator, and this is probably my favorite part of my job. So metabolic flexibility is a really interesting topic. One of my great friends, Dr. Mike T. Nelson, who's been on the Coach's Corner University podcast a couple of times, he's got a phenomenal course on this, and if you're interested in learning more, I would definitely recommend you check that out. I'll put a link to it in the description. Metabolic flexibility essentially boils down to how well our body can switch between fuel sources depending on the demands placed upon it. Now, in order to understand metabolic flexibility, you have to understand a few nuances about metabolism itself. We have essentially three energy systems: one that's quick, one that's medium, and one that's long duration. Now, those can be broken down a little bit further. So you have your anaerobic alactic energy system, which is your creatine, phosphate, and ATP. Quick, high power, less than 10 seconds. Then you have your glycolytic energy system, which burns glucose, and that can either be pushed into lactic acid in the absence of oxygen, but in the presence of oxygen, now that system continues into the aerobic system, which primarily burns fat. Now, with metabolic flexibility, the key here is at all times, all of these energy systems are working. So even if you're in a hard lifting session or strength training session where the majority of your sets are less than 10 seconds long, your recovery between sets is still aerobic. So the majority of our recovery is through that aerobic system, producing ATP to allow us to recover from that bout of exercise. The beauty about metabolic flexibility is we can actually train ourselves to be more efficient at utilizing different fuel sources. The other concept to think about is resting exchange ratio, or RER. Resting exchange ratio is a number between 0.7 and 1.0, or even slightly above if you're burning lactic acid for energy. The closer you are to 0.7, the more purely fatty acids you're going to use. So you think long duration, slow exercise, a 3-hour walk, you're going to be more so burning fats. Then you can also be up at like a max effort sprint where you're primarily going to be, at that 1.0 or even above if you're actually burning lactic acid as fuel. We can impact our RER, or our resting exchange ratio, based on the fed state that we are when we perform the exercise. So if you are in a fasted state and you're more so glycogen depleted, you can push yourself closer to 0.7. If you're in a fed state and then you supplement with exogenous carbohydrates, you can push yourself to that 1.0. A 1.0 above, like you're talking max effort, VO2 max or beyond exercise. So very few of us actually train within that range at any given amount of frequency. So understanding fuel sources. So we have carbohydrates. Those are stored in the muscle as glycogen, in the liver as glycogen, or they can be taken exogenous through like a carbohydrate powder, energy gels, things of that nature. We have fat that is stored in the muscle, where there are fatty storages within muscle tissue, especially in more aerobically trained individuals. And then we have stored fat in our subcutaneous fat, visceral fat, things of that nature. We can also think about another fuel source that is getting a lot more popular these days, which is ketones. So ketones are produced through gluconeogenesis. So in a fasted state, your body will utilize proteins through the process of gluconeogenesis to create glucose that also produces ketone bodies. Ketone bodies are burned very quickly for energy, and they are actually a primary fuel source of the brain. So people who supplement with ketones often will report some improvements in cognitive function. And these are primarily, they can also be taken exogenously. When you're taking exogenous ketones, you can actually push yourself down in that resting exchange ratio to primarily fat burning. So this is something that I actually utilize. I fast for 24 hours a week. I primarily do that for gut health, but I also do it for metabolic flexibility to train my body to be more efficient burning fat as fuel. Being in a fasted state, taking exogenous ketones can kind of kickstart that process. It creates almost a fasting mimicking type of situation. And then we also have protein. So I put protein in parentheses. Protein is your muscle tissue. In an ideal scenario, we're eating at a calorie balance. we're taking in at least 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of protein. In this situation, you probably will not be burning muscle for energy unless you're doing fasted exercise for a really long time at a high intensity. Then you will probably get into gluconeogenesis. We also have to consider, so we have our fuel sources. When it comes to exercise, we have to consider the intensity of the exercise and the duration. So with intensity, we have high intensity. That's going to be more so lifting, like bodybuilding training, high intensity, like loads with very low proximity to failure. So you're looking at training to failure or beyond failure, or that zone 4, zone 5 cardiovascular activity. Medium intensity, we're talking like more so powerlifting or strength training, or zone 3 to 4 aerobic exercise. And then we've got low, so that's like our zone 1, zone 2, walking, jogging, steady state cardio that you might do during a bodybuilding prep. Then our durations. So I separated this out: less than 60 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes, or 90 minutes plus. This middle range to upper range could be a little bit more flexible depending on the intensity of the exercise, but for the purpose of providing general guidelines, we're going to keep this pretty simple, okay? So when we're talking about the different types of training that we do, I took you through a number of different exercise modalities. So I did some strength training. Today I'm going to do a bodybuilding workout. I did some HIIT training on the bike. We did some running. We did some tempo runs. We did kettlebell circuits. We did manual labor. And then today I also have a ruck. Depending on my situation, I might differ in my carbohydrate intake, whether I'm taking exogenous carbohydrates, whether I'm having some carbohydrates immediately pre-workout, or whether I'm doing that workout in a completely fasted state. Some of these, for me, non-negotiable, I'm going to have carbohydrates, like my weight training sessions, my HIIT sessions, my tempo runs. I'm going to make sure that I do have carbohydrates in me while I do those exercises because they are of higher intensities. Things like the kettlebell circuit, the manual labor, the ruck, some of my easier runs, I may do those fasted depending on the time of day they get done, or depending on the session that I'm doing afterwards or the next day. So it's all considered within the global plan of I'm training for performance, but I also want to be able to switch between fuel sources. Another thing to consider with all of this is how sensitive your body is to insulin. The main priority for all of us should be to maximize something called nutrient partitioning. So the percentage of the food that we eat that actually goes towards recovery, putting into that glycogen, putting into that muscle tissue to make sure that we're getting stronger, getting bigger, staying lean, but also being prepared for that next bout of exercise and glycogen replenished. Some general guidelines here. If you're going to go at low intensity for less than 60 minutes, I would do that fasted, and I may or may not have some ketones during that. I switch between the two. Ketones for me, I'm not sold on them. I've utilized them. I do find I'm performing a little bit better with ketones versus purely fasted, but for now, I switch between the two. Again, we're trying to be flexible. We're trying to train our body to utilize fuels in a flexible fashion. If you're going low intensity over 60 minutes, this is when you're going to get into that situation where you will deplete glycogen to a pretty significant degree. So my recommendation is 10 grams of carbs per 15 minutes beyond 60 minutes of exercise. So if you're doing a 90-minute low intensity session, you're only looking at about 20 grams of carbohydrates, right? 15 minutes, 2 bouts of 15 minutes beyond 60, 10 grams per 15 minutes. Medium intensity, less than 60 minutes. I may do that fasted. This is kind of my flex session. So this ruck, today, I'm actually using some ketones. Last week I did it fasted. The week prior, I actually did it after breakfast, so I wasn't fasted. I mix that up. This flex session is probably the most important in terms of what fuel source I'm going to utilize. If you're going medium intensity, 60 to 90 minutes, I'm having carbohydrates, right? Like that's going to be a tough session. 15 grams for every 15 minutes. So if we're going for 60 minutes at a medium intensity, you're looking at 60 grams of carbohydrates for that period. If we extend that beyond 90 minutes, I would add 5 grams to that recommendation. So we're going 2 hours, you're looking at 8 rounds of 15 minutes. That's 20 grams. That's a significant amount of carbohydrates for that session. You're looking at like 80 grams of carbohydrates. High intensity less than 60 minutes, 15 grams per 15 minutes, and then high intensity over 60 minutes. This you're thinking about like 10K races or even like into a half marathon. You're looking at 20 to 25 grams per 15 minutes of exercise. This session doesn't get done very often. So when we look at the different ways that we can utilize different fuel sources based on our needs, the key is let's put ourselves in some very different situations with different fuel source utilizations. When training volume is super high, you're going to be insulin sensitive. I'm training 3 times a day. My body is always churning over glucose. So how can I put myself in situations to train it to burn fats? Well, I can do some of my sessions first thing in the morning fasted. I can also implement fasting into my week with a 24-hour fast. And that doesn't need to be weekly. I've done it, a couple weeks in a row, then taking a week off. It all depends on that Monday workout because I usually fast from Saturday dinner time to Sunday dinner time. And I have found that if my Monday session is more intense, my performance on that day is a bit depleted because I've had that fast on Sunday and only had a couple of meals. The idea here is the more metabolically flexible you are, the more you will bias towards a positive nutrient partitioning situation, meaning the better you will be at utilizing glucose because you will be so insulin sensitive. If we're really good at burning fats, we're probably going to be good at being in a low insulin situation. If we are intaking carbohydrates, we're going to be increasing insulin and therefore being able to leverage it to store glucose. What all of this means is if you are a very metabolically flexible individual who leverages carbohydrate intake appropriately during training, does some fasted exercise, and maintains a lower body fat percentage, you're going to be very efficient at nutrient partitioning, and you will more than likely be able to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time, which ultimately is the holy grail. All right, so for me, I don't need to gain any weight. I don't need to lose any weight. I just want to be in the best condition possible in terms of body fat percentage for my given body weight. And I'm leveraging metabolic flexibility for that. I hope that was clear for you guys. I know it was a lot to throw at you, but if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer.